languages, ceremonies, and culture of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who call this territory home. The First Peoples' connection to the land teaches us about our inherent responsibility to protect and respect Mother Earth. With this acknowledgement, we honor the ancestors and children who have been buried here, missing and murdered Indigenous women and men, and the process of ongoing collective healing for all human beings. We are reminded that we are all treaty people and of the responsibility we have to one another. I invite you to think about what this land acknowledgement means for you. And when you visit our campus, I challenge you to try and find the saying, "We are all related." So the best class ever. As I said, my name is Joanne Meinecker, and my background is in sociology. I study things like social exclusion, women involved in the justice system, young people involved in youth crime, and social caring. I've served as Associate Dean since 2018, and I've been at MacEwan since 2004. I'm joined with two of my arts and science colleagues this afternoon. Dr. Sarah Gruel received her PhD in comparative literature from the University of Michigan in 2016 and joined the English department in 2017 as an assistant professor. Dr. Gruel's areas of teaching and research include South Asian literature, lyric theory and poetics, and global hip hop. And she works in curriculum development and literacy for early Punjabi readers. She's dedicated to helping students flourish as writers, critical thinkers, and engaged global citizens. Before I introduce my next panel member, I'm going to welcome Sarah and just invite her to say a few words about her work and herself to you all.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to see so many attendees at today's session. As Dr. Meinecker mentioned, I'm Dr. Graywall. I teach a wide range of stuff, mostly post-colonial literature, but also some hip hop. If you are in my English 102 in the fall or the winter, I usually theme that around hip hop as well. And I just want to say, a lot of you guys probably, heard that I'm an English professor and thought, oh, if I see you for English 102, then maybe I might have you as a prof, but otherwise I will never take another English class after the required ones. And I think that's because English gets a really bad rep from what it looks like in high school, and it is very, very different in university. So keep an open mind when you come to your English classes, and I hope I can see some of you again in the fall.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grail. Global humanitarian issues matter as well to Dr. Cam McDonnell, who is chair of the Computer Science Department, and he's been doing that since 2017, and an associate professor in computing science. Since his arrival at MacEwan in 2011, Cam has shared his passion for teaching critical computer literacy skills to students, and his research focuses on broadening student participation in computer science through connections with other disciplines like the humanities, design, and business. So I'll turn it over to you, Cam.
Thank you very much, Joanne. Nice to see you all here. I am very impressed that so many students are attending in the late days of August, when usually we're trying to forget that school's starting right around the corner and still soak up summer. So it's great to see so many here. I would just echo what Dr. Gruel said about being open-minded. I think almost any subject can be pigeonholed or sometimes has stereotypes associated with it. So English, reading dusty old books, and computer science, a class full of people who you may feel don't look like you or don't have the same interests as you. I must have to be into video games if I'm going to take computer science. That's absolutely not true. Computers do lots of things around the world, and I'm really passionate about conveying that to our students. And I would just again reiterate that applies to every subject area. It really has to do with getting engaged in the material, finding the part that's most interesting or engaging for you, And I hope we are going to talk about how you can do that in some ways that could apply to any class that you take.
Fantastic. Thanks. So starting university, starting any new journey is an exciting experience. It can be unnerving though. I'm sure you've already felt the stress of what's going to happen when I start my classes. Do I have everything prepared? So you're not alone in that. There's new norms you're going to need to learn, new processes to figure out, and just not knowing what to expect is something that you can expect. Showing up to a session called the best class ever, though, suggests that we all have something in common, and that's caring about what happens in the classroom, caring about teaching and caring about learning. So if you don't mind, Danny, could you make sure that our chat is open? And Cam and Sarah, would you watch the comments? I'm going to put a question out there, which is just when you hear this phrase, best class ever, what does it mean to you? What kind of things are coming to your mind when you think about the best class ever? So please enter the chat. We'll take a couple moments. I'll invite you to come up with the things that are percolating in your brain right now. Can't see my chat, so maybe Cam or Sarah, you can tell me what's coming.
Okay, we've got enjoyable, memorable, amazing students and teachers, fun and interesting topics, engaging material, passionate professor, effective, learning something I won't forget, organization, fun and engaging. I'm seeing engaging coming up over and over again. Challenging, something that's challenging or feeling like you grow when you're done with the class, feeling like you have grown. Complete comprehension of the material. One person says no mental breakdown, so let's keep our bar low for success in a class. Not boring. Detailed, comfortable. Okay. Teachers who love what they're teaching. Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of reiteration of passionate professors.
Yeah.
Being able to talk to the professors, so feeling, like the professor is approachable. Another person chimed in support systems for when breakdowns do inevitably happen. So that's a really good point, and I hope we can address that at some point. I think along with approachability, we've got open communication between profs and students, feeling welcome. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything.
Great, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. The theme of engagement, definitely something we've done these sessions in the past. And so often the early responses we get are all about what that prof is doing or not doing, all about what's going on at the front of the classroom. But when you ask students to think a little bit more about it, they come up with all kinds of things that really relate to many people and the shared responsibility among you and your peers as students, and of course your professor. Relationships that happen in the classroom and the connections that we can make with each other are so central to all of us participating in making the best class ever. So that's great. What I thought we could do with this tone set that we're thinking about the ways that every member of that classroom community can be engaged is we'd start from the point of departure of plan for success. And as an entry point there, we ask the question, what's a syllabus? You may have heard of course outlines back in high school. Our syllabus here is a really essential document, and sometimes it's pretty long, but we encourage you to read it. Cam, why is the syllabus just such a really important point of departure for our courses for our students?
Yeah, again, it's hard to share a lot of media in these some of these calls. So there's a video from Snoop Dogg, speaking of hip hop, encouraging students to read the syllabus. So you can look that up after this session. And I think he says it's all in there, and that's really true about um, the, the operation of the course. Much more than just sort of a description of things that might happen in the classroom, the syllabus is actually a contract, really. And as Dr. Meinecker points out there, sometimes contracts aren't super exciting to read. But in terms of what we're going to be learning to do throughout your education at in university and at MacEwan, is not just about learning the material that's in the class. It's about building skills that are going to help you. And it's probably not a shock to many of you to learn that you're going to have to read things that aren't exciting in your life. And it's really important that you read those things carefully, or else you could end up signing something without realizing what's going on. And so it's okay that it's not exciting, and it's not that long. And if we think of, compare it to sort of a website, if most of us looked at a website, particularly today, we know that there's lots of information around the side. If you think about all the advertisements and things like that that are out there, we're able to hone in on what's important because we've used these websites so much. And the same is kind of true for syllabi. The more you read them, the better you'll get at reading them. And so the first one, you'll say, boy, there's a lot of stuff in here. But to ensure a good learning environment for our students, there's lots of stuff that has to be in there. And a lot of it's similar across all the courses to ensure that there's academic integrity and people are doing their coursework properly and on their own, where to go for help if you need it. And a lot of that will be consistent. So you'll be able to boil down to what is really essential. So there's some basic things that reading the syllabus will help you do, such as getting your professor's name correct, knowing who your professor is, where they are, how much the tests are all worth. And those kind of questions sometimes come up, and it's all there in the syllabus, and the syllabus is really easy to find. It's going to be on the main site on Blackboard or emailed to you from your professor. And it's, again, there's really good information in there, and it won't take you that long to read it. And again, it's a way to kind of build that skill about learning important details that are going to affect the next few months of your life while you're taking that class.
That's great advice. It kind of brings us to this whole question of managing expectations. Even if you take the same class as your friend or your family member that's taken it before, the same course, let's say English 102. Every instructor's English 102 class is not going to look the same way. They have a different pedagogy. They have different texts that they might use. They have different approaches, and you're going to find all that essential information in the syllabus. So maybe Sarah, can you speak a little bit to sections that you might put in your course outline or course syllabus around your classroom community or expectations you have of students and what students can expect of you?
Yeah, thanks. So I always have, so on the very first page of your syllabus, that's kind of like you should bookmark that information somewhere. So for example, your instructor's email address, where their office is, when their office hours are, that means when you can reach them, when they've made themselves available for you. All of that information is just right on that, even what your classroom is, all of that is on the very top of the syllabus. And then toward the bottom of the first page is usually any required textbooks. I would also wait and see what your prof says about the textbook. Sometimes the textbook is actually required and will be used a lot. Sometimes it's kind of optional. So those kinds of things are I wouldn't rush out and get a textbook for me personally. I don't require textbooks in my 102, but lots of other profs do. So that just goes to, look at the syllabus. Don't assume that you're going to go on the bookstore website and, oh, I'm taking English 102. Let me just, get my book for whatever the standard book is for English 102. Turns out Dr. Earle doesn't need you to spend that money on your textbook, right? So look at the syllabus first. Then I have a bunch of different resources. So where do you get academic help? Where do you get help choosing your classes? Where do you get help for those breakdowns that you guys are already kind of planning ahead for? Where do you get help for what if you experience racism in the classroom? So there's lots of different resources on campus. What if you break your arm and you need some accommodations? What if you get COVID and you need some accommodations? So all of those things have resources for you in the syllabus. You'll also have instructor course policies. Those are really important for you to look carefully at for each of your different syllabi because they are going to be different for every instructor. Every instructor has their own way of doing things, their own preferences. Especially that's, I think, more true than ever now with different learning modalities. Some classes are having some online components and some in-person components. Some are entirely online, some are entirely face-to-face. Even the ones that are hybrid that have both online and in-person components, that, you know, some people are going to be meeting once a week, every week in person. Some people are going to be meeting less frequently or more frequently. So every class is going to be run really differently. That's true always. It's extra true in COVID times. So I would double check that. That's where you'll find that information about your class modality and what your instructor's expectations are for you in terms of when and where you should be showing up, how you're going to be showing up, whether online or in person, et cetera, et cetera. You will also find information that is just general information about what if you want to withdraw from the course, what academic integrity expectations, and those are the things that you might want to read really carefully when you're first starting out, and then you'll learn to sort of figure out, okay, I see this on every syllabus, so maybe I can read it once really carefully and make sure I'm not missing anything. But you'll kind of learn to filter out some of that information. And then for me, the really key thing as well is at the end of my syllabus, I put it at the end, it might be in different places for different people, just what the schedule is from week to week. And the other thing that varies from syllabi to syllabus to syllabus is how detailed that is. For me, I'm super type A, so I have the whole semester laid out what we're going to be talking about in class each day, what the readings are, whether it's going to be a video or a live online course or an in-person, all of that. It's color-coded, right? So that's for me. Other profs might not be that detailed about it, but what will definitely be on there is big due dates, for example. So again, I mentioned I'm type A. What I used to do when I was an undergrad is look through all of my syllabi and plan out on a calendar, like write down, okay, in English, I have an exam on this day. In math, I have an exam on this other day. So you can kind of plan ahead of what your heavy weeks are going to be. So you can look at your due dates. As Cam mentioned, there's also the weighting of those different assignments. So maybe that one exam is going to be 10%, another exam is going to be 25%. You'll find all of that out in the syllabus as well. You'll find out attendance policies. Some profs require attendance, others don't. Again, that's going to be different in the pandemic. So for example, I used to require attendance. Now I don't, because I don't think it's really fair given everything that's going on. So even if you have a brother or sister or friend who took my class before, my policies change every year and every semester as I'm revising and looking at the situation and seeing what works. So you really have to look for that information and make sure that you're understanding what your instructor is expecting of you.
That's all great advice. And I want to add a couple things that my memory got jogged when you talked about withdrawing. So a couple things in my role I find students sometimes are uncertain about. At the beginning of a semester where there's some movement, some people are dropping a class, some people are adding, make note of the add drop date. That's at the front end of the semester, and you won't pay to stay in that course if you drop it. Of course, if you're the one that's added it, you're in the class. You are able to withdraw without academic penalty up until the very last day of your class in the semester. So that's something to keep in mind if that might be necessary. So thinking about taking multiple classes, all the advice that you've already heard about one course, apply that over your 3 courses, your 4 courses, whatever the number it might be, and think about how you can understand them in context with each other. Because when it plays out, you're going to be going from multiple classes to other classes, and then realizing that if you don't in advance think about when those due dates are going to come up and what different things are expected of you in terms of your participation in the class, you can run into difficulties. So be as proactive as possible. Planning for success. So before we move on, setting goals. What are your advice and feedback about goal setting?
I actually would like to bring up the title of the slide. Planning for success is kind of easy. Planning for things in which you're not successful is will be probably something that defines your career as a student. So obviously we have great ambitions to be successful in things, but it's just reality that not all things are going to go particularly as smoothly as you might expect. You're probably expecting that at university there's not going to be the same level of support in learning as there was for when you were in high school. And that's okay. Again, it's about building skills for seeking out what you need to be successful. Some students need more support. Some students don't need that same support. Some need it through very official channels for students who may have a disability of some kind. And so if your class begins to not go well, what do you do? And that's really, I think, where you're going to have to expect that. That will be one of the expectations, is that not everything's going to go perfectly. There was lots of great things about a prof who's entertaining, a class that's engaged. Well, those won't happen in every single class that you take, and that's okay, because whatever you go on to in life, you're going to be in situations where you're trying to listen to a speaker who's not out in super engaging. You're going to be working with coworkers or an environment where people aren't engaged. And so what do you have to do to be able to succeed? And again, for the things about engagement, I would certainly say it's like the first snowflake in an avalanche. It just takes that first student who's asking a good question, who's got an idea, for another student who, I don't want to draw attention to myself. I don't want to be the only person speaking. And so you emulate the behavior that you would like. And if you engage with a professor, even if that's outside the classroom, then that can feed that engagement, perhaps in a way that you didn't expect. And so that's what I would suggest, is to plan for those things that don't go well, and really think about, what do I need to do? And those skills will last longer than I would argue any piece of knowledge about a subject that you'll learn, is kind of learning to succeed in those different environments.
Thanks, Cam. Should we move to the next slide, Sarah, or do you have more to add?
I don't have more to add on that. I just do want to say, I want to highlight a question that came up in the chat from one of the attendees right now, which is a great question. We just went on at length about how important syllabi are, and one of our attendees asked, where do we find these documents, vital documents? And that's a really good question. So you will access a lot of these materials through Blackboard, which is our online learning system. And you can get into that through your portal. So if you log into My Student System, the way that you enrolled in your classes, you'll see a little link for Blackboard. You can click on that. The more direct way to do it as well is just to go to learn.mcewen.ca. I put that in the chat. And then that'll bring you into Blackboard. Right now, your instructors, if they're like me, have not opened up the courses yet. So right now I'm still putting all the content into the courses. And so I don't want you guys to see me moving everything around. And so I have it closed, but I usually open that up a couple days before the semester starts, and I will send out an email when it's available. And so that's when you'll be able to go in and see the syllabus on Blackboard, but just keep checking Blackboard. And actually, even more importantly, keep checking your email, because once your prof starts getting ready and stops being in denial about the semester starting, then that's when you'll start receiving communications. So make sure you're checking your McEwen email. And I think that's something that first year students forget about, is that everything is going to come through your McEwen email. So and you also need to communicate with your prof through your McEwen email. So make sure you're checking your McEwen email, and that's where you'll find out more information going forward.
Thank you. So our next slide to unpack is Engagement 101. I think that we all have different notions of what we're comfortable with in terms of social settings and new environments. And to be engaged is not defined as meeting 3 criteria. You're always talking, you're always there, you love the subject matter. Engagement is actually its meaning really depends on the context and depends on the people involved. So when I think back of going to university in my first year, some of my colleagues now might be surprised that I wasn't a student to raise my hand. I wasn't somebody who was really vocal. The way I participated and the way I engaged was much more introverted. It was in office hours separately, one-on-one with my professor. It was studying and talking with friends and outside in smaller circles. So with respect to engagement, think about and challenge yourself and your own comfort zone a little bit in terms of what you're comfortable with and what you want to how you want to engage with the class. But engagement is something that is not just an all or nothing, a simple a thing that you just do or you don't do. But we can see it. Your profs can see it. We can see different kinds of engagement. So we're not just looking for that person that always puts up their hand. And we're not dismissing in our assessments somebody that engages with the course material and shows up in different ways to show their enthusiasm and their involvement in the content. So that's just how I want to start things around engagement, to get you thinking about what it might mean for you. And this will change. I certainly was a different student in my 4th year than I was in my 1st year. So what kind of advice, suggestions, ideas to think about can we give this group around being prepared and proactive when it comes to engaging with the courses they're taking?
I would say the slide is spot on. Be prepared, show up, and get involved. I sound like a broken record. These are lessons that will help you in all sorts of circumstances. There is a few questions about ADR, and I'll just in the chat, and I'll just mention those quickly. ADR is the link that Sarah posted. It's Access and Disability Resources. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And maybe we can ask more questions about, or answer questions about it at the end, since it's quite specific. Yeah, being prepared and showing up. And I know there was a comment earlier on about someone saying, "Oh, I wish we could be in person and not as much online." Many of us share that, professors included. I like my basement here, but I miss the interaction. And so again, like a lot of things in life, it's about doing the best you can with what you have. Sometimes in classes, the typing into the chat seems like a lot of work. I gotta, instead of just saying a question that I have, so maybe I won't do it. Well, I encourage you to get over that hump and try to engage. And as faculty, we really do love questions, because again, we're passionate about this material. We've committed a lot of our life to learning about it, and so the fact that someone's interested in it really helps us engage, and it will help other students engage. Showing up is a big part. So sometimes on those cold winter mornings, or again, if you're online, you might think, well, it doesn't really matter if I'm there. Turning on your camera, chatting, whatever you can do to help engage, both in person and online, will help everybody. And so it sounds simple, showing up, but it's not. And again, that's exactly what will help you be whatever role you go into in your life, like whether it's in a family, a leadership role somewhere. It's the people who show up and have we're not talking about being prepared at an extraordinary level, but just if there's something to read it, and build that habit of doing the work ahead of time, so you're not scrambling. And these are good habits that will help your home life, will help your work life, your family life. Just putting in that little bit of effort, that little bit it's a lot more than doing nothing and just showing up and trying to absorb things. That's that's going to be a habit that's not going to turn out particularly well in the classroom and beyond.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah, I just want to echo a big one for me is turn on your camera. And I know I don't mean right this second because it's a huge call, but in your online synchronous classes, if and when you have them, it makes such a difference to the feeling of engagement. And it's not the same as being in person, I know, but it can get close as long as you're showing up and making that happen. But you can't rely on your instructor to create that feeling for you if you're not also doing your part to make that feeling happen. I can't tell you how demoralizing it is to lecture to a bunch of black squares. I've done it. It is very sad and it's exhausting. Teaching is my favorite thing to do, but teaching to black squares makes me feel miserable afterwards. So just that little, it's a very small thing you can do to show up. And maybe not every time, like maybe sometimes you know, just rolled out of bed and you really don't want to turn on your camera that day, but another day you happen to straighten your hair in the morning and then turn on your camera. You know, like just think of, you know, you don't have to be consistent in it necessarily, although it's great if you are, but just think, okay, how can I show up for this class today? What capacity do I have today to bring energy to this class, whatever that looks like? If that means talking in the chat, if that means turning on your camera, if that means starting a study group, if that means emailing your prof after class, all of those things are ways of showing up for yourself and for your own education. So I would just pay attention to that. I recently read an article that defines student engagement as what makes learning feel good and what makes learning stick. And so those are two parameters for engagement for yourself. So profs can only facilitate that so much, but you have to decide for yourself, what is going to make this feel good? What is going to make this class feel good for me? And what's going to help me to remember that material? And of course, everyone's answer to that is going to be different depending on your own learning style, depending on your schedule, depending on your personality. But part of being in university is figuring that out. So how can you make learning feel good and how can you make learning stick? And if you're struggling with the answer to those questions, ask your prof, right? How can I learn this material better? I just find it's not sticking. What can I do? So part of showing up is just asking questions and admitting when you need help. I say this to all my first year students, don't silently drown. I can't help you, especially in these circumstances, if I don't know that there's a problem. So reach out and ask a question. And as Cam said, we love questions because even you asking a question, like I have no idea what's going on and I feel like I am just totally out of my depth, that's a start. I can do something with that. But if I don't even know that that's a problem, then I can't really help you. So yeah, I think that's all to say about that.
Yeah, a lot of what you're both saying resonates quite deeply with me. This notion of reaching out, but also reaching in, of trying to figure out a way that you can meaningfully participate today to this class. It's not always going to look the same, but being prepared and developing habits where you're following along as you go allows you to make informed contributions. And that benefits your fellow students, that benefits your instructor, and obviously that benefits yourself too. Because whether or not it's happening online or on campus, teaching and learning are social relations. They exist in concert with each other. And so thinking about the human social component of all of this is really important, in my opinion. So our time is just flying by. I'm not sure if there's anything more in the chat that we should raise before moving on to this broader piece of student experience. And what we were thinking about here is your academic experience, certainly what happens with you, for you, to you in your classes, but more broadly, as you go and embark on a university education, it's not just the academic trajectory that you're on and the academic experiences, but it's a whole host of extracurricular, non-academic, family, personal, work, fun. Not that the teaching and learning can't be fun, but additional things that are about your personal growth. So let's start at the end of time management and come back to the transformation that can happen when you come to university. So time management, balancing roles and responsibilities. You want to take this one, Cam?
Sure. I like to start with a little bit of a math demonstration because a lot of students will say they have no time. So I'm just going to, we're all busy. I certainly get that. So I'll start with a simple question. I think the chat is still open. How many hours are in a week? People are quickly doing the math. 168, perfect. So I'm just going to suggest that you sleep and for about 10 hours a day. That's really good. Maybe you need less. That's, you know, so if you sleep for 10 hours a day, how many waking hours do you have in a week left? Okay, so 10 hours per day. So that's 7 per week. So that's going to leave you with about 98. That's okay, Aiden. Good. Again, incorrect answers are learning opportunities, so that's totally fine. So we got 98 hours left. So Dr. Meinecker made a great point there about fun and work. And so we're going to take that remaining approximately 100 hours and split it right in half. 10 hours per week is enough. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. If you sleep less, then part of that goes to hygiene and that sort of stuff too. So then you have 50 hours for fun and you have 50 hours for work. And by work, I mean schoolwork. And so of those 50 hours, I would guess most of you are taking somewhere between 3 to 5 courses per term. And so that's going to give you at least 10 hours per course. Now, part of that, of course, is I'm going to count the classroom time in there. And so there's about 3 hours of instruction. If you have a lab, maybe there's 6 hours if you're taking a science course or one of the courses that has a lab component. So that's still leaving you 3 to 5 hours or 4 to 5 hours outside of the classroom per week where you could commit some time to each of your courses. So I would say that's a pretty good ballpark for what you should do outside of the classroom. And so that's actually generally more time outside the classroom than inside the classroom. And so whether there's things to read or that sort of stuff. So that's again, a motivation that there is the time there. And I know some people have other responsibilities. You might be working. And again, that's the half that's going to eat into some of the fun time that you might have. But for schoolwork, there should be a good amount of time there. And I've said it every other time too. It's about habits. Getting your work done, sitting down and doing it, turning off the Netflix, turning off the notifications from your phone are really important. And I would say that we might think this is just a school thing, like, oh, getting my schoolwork done. This work translates to wherever you're going next. So whether it's the work that you have to do, like when in your profession or in your home life, sitting down, getting that work going, turning away from things that might be more immediately entertaining is an important habit to develop. And that time management is a habit. Yeah, Victoria, please sleep. Yes, it's absolutely. It's just me. I've gone all the way through a PhD. I have never pulled an all-nighter, never once, and not even really close. Like maybe some 1 a.m.s and 2 a.m.s and things like that. And it is possible. Okay, so it's do what works for you.
Sarah, do you have more personal side of responsibilities or anything to add on?
Yeah, so I would also just figure out, I think part of university, especially in the first year, is just figuring out like what time management strategies work for you. So, a lot of it's going to be trial and error, and you're going to make mistakes in your first year. You're going to think that you have enough time for something and you actually don't. You might have to pull some all-nighters. Not all of us can get through without that. I personally, in my undergrad, I've always been a keener, but I was also really good at knowing exactly how much I could procrastinate before I had to get work done. I've become a lot more sort of on top of things, especially now that I have 2 children that I have to take care of all the time. So things change throughout your life, and your strategies are going to change throughout your life as well. But I think a big part of university is just figuring that out, figuring out, you know, what works, learning to estimate exactly how long something's going to take you. So you might think, oh, I can get this math homework done in 10 minutes because that's how long it used to take you. And it turns out actually it takes you 2 hours now. So learning all of those things, it's a process of trial and error, but also maybe scheduling in the possibility for error. And one of the things that I recommend is that the beginning of the semester, the first 2 weeks, is a lot of times the place where there is more room for error. So start reading ahead, or start getting those little assignments done, you know, things that technically aren't due till the last, you know, the end of the semester, but you could get a jump start on, because you're going to really wish, come October, you're going to really wish that you did whatever you could possibly do back in September, because things just pile up faster than you can even imagine. So of course, your profs are here to help you and all of those things, but you can also help yourself by kind of planning ahead. Again, like I said, if this floats your boat, then plan, like figure out ahead of time what your busy weeks are going to be, right? I know a lot of my students are working, for example, so you should figure out what weeks can you work 20 hours and what weeks do you really need to work just 5 hours, right? So you really, again, going back to the syllabus, look at the syllabus, figure out, you know, when your busy weeks are going to be, figure out, do you really have time to go drive to Calgary to visit your family for 5 days over Thanksgiving, or do you need to make it a 1-day thing, right? So, or COVID permitting anyways. So all of those kinds of things, right? You have to kind of make decisions according to, you know, what your own schedule is and how long things take you. So part of it's figuring it out, but also part of it's being responsive. So when you figure out that your math homework takes 2 hours, then you need to plan for that going forward. So you have to adjust as you go.
So we wanted to spend some time talking about communication, particularly the written communication between yourself and your instructors. Email is going to be used a lot. And I'm going to turn it back to Cam in a moment. I just want to also think about how it's important to recognize respect going both ways. I'm sure we all want the respect of our instructors, but instructors deserve that respect too. And you're going to find most are so amenable, so enthusiastic, so approachable. And you want to just extend that kindness and acknowledge that what people are doing is important, and show that care. So Cam, I know you had a few things to share around respectful communication, polite and language.
I've spoken first a
Yeah.
few times, so maybe Sarah, if Sarah has.
But I did it in order to make sure I keep giving. So let's turn it to Sarah first. Thanks for the good
That's
reminder.
okay.
Yeah, I'm going to take this over as the writing instructor here. So actually, I think this is harder to do now in COVID. I think it's kind of gone by the wayside. But what I used to do is actually on the first day of class, your first assignment was to write a respectful email to your professor, because that is also a skill that you have to learn very quickly in university. And things can go sideways really, really quickly as well if you don't learn that skill, especially now that we're all online. And one of the primary ways that you're making an impression on your professor is via email. You want to make sure that you are approaching that respectfully and appropriately. So the number one thing that my colleagues and I complain about is when a student emails saying, hey. Okay, don't say hey. Okay, you can say, dear Professor so-and-so. Hi is like the most informal I would get. This person is not your friend. It's not your buddy. We're not on Snapchat or whatever you guys are using these days. It's a formal business email. So dear so-and-so. The next thing is, what are you going to do? How are you going to fill in that blank for dear so-and-so? So you have to actually figure out what your professor's name is. Take 2 seconds to look on Blackboard or look in your enrollment and see who you're actually emailing. Use that person's name. And I would err on the side of formality. So I would not right out the gate use your professor's first name. that is a huge pet peeve for me. You should only use your professor's first name if you're explicitly invited to do so. If your professor says, hey, call me Daniel, or hey, call me Mike, or hey, call me Sandy, then you can do that. If not, you should default to professor and then their last name. For me, I explicitly tell my students, please call me Dr. Graywall or Professor Graywall, and I still get students calling me Sarah. And in fact, they often call me Sarah, which is even worse because that's not how you pronounce my name. So just don't do that. Be respectful, and you're never going to make a bad impression by being too respectful, but you can make a bad impression by not being respectful enough. So it's always better to err on the side of formality. So if you're emailing me, you would say, dear Professor Graywall, comma, and then you would, if you're being extra nice, you can even say, how are you? Hope you're doing well, right? So acknowledge that your professor is a human being. That's always nice. And then you can get to the point of what your email is. You should always use proper spelling, punctuation, capitalization, to the best of your knowledge. You might not know if you're doing it perfectly, and that's fine, but don't just do all lowercase and tons of emojis. Again, a formal business email is not the place to do that. So I think really the takeaway is just as formal as possible. Like, go back to your grade 2 lesson on how to write a letter, and you can do that. It also helps if you check the syllabus before you email. So one of the other biggest pet peeves that I get, okay, so the other thing you have to keep in mind is many of your professors have upwards of 120 students per semester, okay? So if every single one of you emails with a question that could be answered if you read the syllabus, that leads to a lot of frustration on the part of your professor. So it's not that we don't want to hear from you, but we don't want to hear from you if it's clogging up our inbox with unnecessary queries. Okay, so the first thing you should do if you have a question is check the syllabus. Is my question already answered on the syllabus? We have gotten similar questions for years and years, so we anticipate a lot of those questions by putting the information in the syllabus. So don't email me to ask where my office is. You can look that up on the web. Google is your friend, or again, you can look on the syllabus. So as much as possible, you should try to be independent in finding answers to questions. And then if that's not, of course, if it's something related to the material that you're just not understanding, of course, feel free to email for that. But just ask yourself, like, does this really need to be an email, or is this a self-help scenario? And so I think that's part of a skill you're actually learning in university is, what do I need to email about and what can I kind of handle myself? And it's not that we're trying to be jerks and saying, don't email us, we don't care about you. It's just that we actually want to have the time and mental energy and capacity for the emails that really matter. And we also want you to learn these skills of being independent and finding information on your own. We can't be the crutch for you. So you really have to go out and try and find that information first before you email us. I think that's everything. Cam, did I miss anything?
Yeah, and I was making a joke in the chat there with the LOL and the U, but we do get emails with no capitalization, no punctuation, and again, it's not putting your best foot forward, as Sarah said, and I just realized I've been mispronouncing your last name, so I apologize for that, but. Texting obviously has impacted the way we interact electronically, and again, that little bit of the mind switch when you are sending email, it's not a text message, even though you're typing, and our apps make the two look really similar. An analogy I would give, which may not be perfect, is when we answer the telephone, we say hello every single time. That's kind of our convention, and so you might think it's weird because you don't do it with a lot of other people, but I really do I absolutely agree with Sarah that it's say hello every single time. No one is going to complain that you're being overly formal, and there are kind of consequences the other way, and this will, when you're emailing about a job, writing cover letters, these habits will just make all those things go faster, and reduce the likelihood that you're going to make a faux pas when when it's perhaps going to cost you something more significantly than a professor just giving you a minor direction, or asking you to email properly.
That's really good. In terms of the emails as well, to Sarah's point about having so many students, in the subject line, if you put in your course name and number, that's a really convenient way for that professor, especially if you haven't developed rapport, you don't know if they know who you are by just your name and student number at the bottom of the email. That's really, really helpful. So our time is coming to a close. We do have an opportunity for some more Q&A. I've really appreciated what's been happening in the chat so far. This new student orientation is just a little bit more special for me. I have my own new student, my own son who's going to be entering university this fall, and I got to thinking about this session and the kind of advice that I would want to share with him that I think might be advice that others in a similar situation might like. So I want to close around academic and personal growth with a few lessons. Take your studies and your grades seriously, but remember you are not your marks. The mark that you're going to make has a lot more to do with how you treat others than any academic achievement. Develop some work-life vibe that feels right for you. Adapt. Try something else. Non-academic activities will enhance your effectiveness in learning anything. Make your university experience more fulfilling. Embrace all of it, from the assignment you finally finished even when everything was going wrong, or the risk you took to ask that question in class or ask that peer out for coffee. Embrace the big and the small moments, because you just will never know when a moment is going to change your future. Remember that your profs and your peers and all the people who work on campus are human with diverse experiences. Make a generous assumption that they're showing up the best that they can. And this also applies to you. Have compassion for yourself. You will learn theories and concepts. You'll study facts. You'll study figures. You'll debate issues, and you'll work to solve problems. When people say the process matters, it's not just the outcome or the end result. Please believe them. If people tell you not to question, to stop seeking, don't listen. Keep learning. Making meaningful connections with people, cultivate friendships, building strong relationships, a support system, making connections across different subject matters, across different ideas and contexts. That's what's going to really enrich your university experience. Be curious about people, be curious about the world around you, to understand yourself and how you can make a social contribution. So this first year of university is really about exploration, inside and outside the classroom. So we have a few minutes now to answer some questions, or at least point you to the places where you might be able to get answers to your questions.
Yeah, so thank you so much to our wonderful presenters for their very informative presentation. We hope you all learned a lot from them today. But yeah, so the chat box is open for any questions you might have for them. We can go through them. Anything you just want to know, we can definitely get you that information. So please drop your questions here. While we wait for the questions to come in, I want to remind you all that we have more information sessions happening up until September 3rd. So check out the NSO website to see the list of events we have. On September 7th, we have a super cool virtual welcome event happening 11 a.m. that day. If you're part of the first year Discord server, there will be a watch party happening that day with the rest of your peers, so we can all watch that together. Any important links, such as the NSO website, as well as our social media profiles, will be posted on the chat box as well for you to take a look at. So let's get started with the Q&A. So any questions you have, please let us know.
We were going to bring up ADR when questions came up that earlier, so I'll just start there while we're waiting for more people to ask questions in the chat.
Yeah, sure.
So ADR is where you should go if you need accommodations for any disabilities, temporary or long-term. So that could be a learning disability. That could also be, again, like I said, you broke your arm, something like that. If you know in advance that you have something that is going to require accommodation, you should already go ahead and begin gathering documentation. Maybe you already have documentation. You're going to want to work with ADR to get those accommodations on paper. So what that will look like is you'll contact them, they'll ask for documentation. They can also help you get that documentation, I believe, if it's a new challenge that you're facing or a new disability. And once you kind of figure out what accommodations are needed, then ADR will produce a letter, an accommodations letter, and then that letter will go out to your professors. I believe you have to share that letter actually. So they'll give you the letter and then you will email that letter to professors. And on that letter, it says what accommodations you need. It does not say the reason for the accommodations. So it doesn't violate your privacy in that way where it says what your disability is or what your particular challenge will be, but it'll say the student requires time and a half for exams and a quiet exam area. The student requires that all notes be posted ahead of time, and they require the ability to record classes. So all of those things are laid out in the letter. And your professor is required by law to abide by those accommodations. And again, it's not a violation of privacy because we don't know what the accommodations are for. We're just going to make sure that you get them. So that's kind of how the process works for that. Did I miss anything, Joanne, Kim, with ADR?
No, I think that's good. When in doubt, start there, and they can provide you with the information. That was a great description.
Yeah.
Right.
Advice for student athletes. I haven't had a ton of student athletes, and usually the ones I've had have been super on top of their schedule. So I would just say, you know, everything that we've said here doubly applies to you if you're a student athlete, because you do have so many constraints on your time and so many responsibilities that you're taking care of. So plan in advance if you know you are going to be out of town or you have a game at a certain time that is causing you to miss class. You should let your prof know that ahead of time. But your prof should be willing to work with you and have had experience with other student athletes in the same boat.
There's a question about orientation as well. Maybe Danny can, about what day the student orientation is taking place, if that wasn't already conveyed.
Yeah, so we're doing student orientation online up until September 3rd, and then we'll have the welcome event, like the actual orientation video, happening on the 7th at 11 a.m. So if you are a part of the Discord, we're all going to join together and watch that video on student orientation day. But there are a lot of informative sessions that are taking place over the next 2 weeks. So if you haven't already registered for any others, like please go to the NSO Google site and you can register and join all of our other sessions happening over the next 2 weeks.
Just to follow on the comment about student athletes, and someone else had a question, I think, about even if you're not an athlete, time management is a challenge, and you'll have friends that you might know who are in university, and kind of as if a car drives by you that's swerving, and maybe not doing such a good job of driving, don't start swerving. We never start swerving like the car in front of us is doing. We kind of keep on our way, and sometimes it can be tough, but you need to establish your boundaries about what works for you and what other people may be doing. And these might be your friends, they may be your teammates, and you know, it takes some sort of strength, and again, it's a good habit to sort of say what you can do and what you have to do to succeed, and not necessarily, even if your friends are going out, you know, it's tough to say no, knowing that you have something you have to do the next day. When I was an undergrad at my university, the stats exams were always on Saturday mornings in the first weekend of October, which means I could really very rarely attend the Halloween Friday night parties. And that was just a little bit of a sacrifice that I had to make to ensure that I didn't bomb my stats exams. And so that could be tough, but again, it's just kind of developing those habits, and that'll carry on well beyond university as well. So, you know, don't emulate bad habits that you see from other people, even if they're your friends or teammates or whatever.
I want to address, let me think, I think it was Autumn's question about tips for the specific days when you can't get your brain to focus. I would say, you know, if this is a consistent problem that you're having trouble focusing, you might want to see if there's, you know, if you might need an accommodation or something like that. But we all have those days, especially again in the pandemic and being online a lot. And so again, this is really up to you to figure out what works for you. For me, I would say taking a walk and just clearing your head and then coming back to it, working in short segments rather than trying to force yourself to work for a full hour at a time. There's something called the Pomodoro method, where you set a timer for 20 to 25 minutes and you have your phone off, you have everything, you're totally free of distractions for those 20 minutes. And then when the timer goes off, you take a 10-minute break, and sort of working in those shorter spurts, like really focused short spurts rather than long periods where your attention can when your attention can wander. Yeah, there's lots of different things. I believe our student life people also put on little like info sessions about things like this. Danny can probably confirm that. Yeah, so keep an eye out for those kinds of things as well.
But yeah, if there are any other questions, please email us at firstyear@mcewen.ca. Our student workers would love to connect with all of you and like answer any other questions you might have. But thank you so much to everyone for participating in the Q&A and just being here for our first session. Thank you once again to our presenters for taking the time out today to share lots of information with us, as well as answer all of your questions.